This is the second in the season of Writers in Conversation, a partnership series of events between the University of Southampton English Department and Nuffield Southampton Theatres. Perhaps tonight's guest is the ultimate guest for this kind of partnership event, since Mr. Evan Placey is both a prize-winning playwright who's been performed at least once in this very space, and a creative writing fellow for the English department at the University of Southampton. Evan is a Canadian-British playwright who grew up in Toronto and now lives in London, and has just been nominated for the Deutsche Jugendtheaterpreis in Germany for his play Girls Like That. The play has previously won him the Writers Guild Award, the Scenic Youth Prize in France, and the Jugendtheaterpreis in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. Most recently, his play Orange Polar Bear, co-written with Sun Duk Ko, premiered at the National Theatre Company of Korea in Seoul, and his short The Sari, the Forward Theatre project, premiered at Derby Theatre. Scarberia, Young People's Theatre in Toronto, 5 Dora nominations, including Best Play for Young Audiences and Wild, Tutti Frutti's UK tour. So that is just giving you a sense of the prolific Mr. Evan Placey. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm round of applause, please, for our tonight's guest. My name's Rupert Rogoff, and I'm sorry you don't have Carol Burns, who's your usual host in these things. I'm the head of engagement here at Nuffield Southampton Theatres. Evan.
Hi.
How did you become a playwright?
How did I become a playwright? I was a child actor. So I did commercials, I was in a Liza Minnelli music video, I thought I was going to be an actor. And then I went to performing arts school. So sort of like half your day was academics, half the day was arts. And I quickly realized I wasn't good enough to be an actor. When you're even that young in a school full of everyone who's really good at acting, you quickly realize where you sort of fall in the order. And my teachers didn't like me as an actor, so started getting me to do things behind the scenes. And then I wrote a play one day, and the school put it on, and I fell in love with writing. And then I came to London and did a master's at Central School of Speech and Drama, and that's how I began.
So I've got to just pick up Liza Minnelli musical. What was that?
It was a music video that Liza Minnelli did called The Day After That, and it was filming in Toronto, and she needed a group of kids in it.
Has anybody seen that?
No, probably not. I'm sure you can use it
okay.
and try and find an 8-year-old me in it.
Okay, so you've written obviously tons of work, and let's get into this straight away, which is you've written lots for young people. Kind of how and why have you ended up writing so much for young people?
Kind of happened by accident. Well, it did happen by accident. While I was starting out as a writer and trying to make a living, the sort of job I did on the side was always stuff with young people. So I used to work as a special needs assistant, I was a TA with a boy with autism, I ran drama classes, and I was running the education department at the Hackney Empire Theatre. And then after my first play, which was not for young people, Mother of Him, the Hampstead Theatre offered me a commission to write a play for their youth theatre. And then it just snowballed from that. And so suddenly I started getting offers for commissions for young people, and then I realized it made perfect sense to sort of blend the sort of day job, if you will, of my other love, working with young people, and my writing. And then I just sort of realized, it made sense to sort of bring those two things together.
So what did you study at Central? What was that?
It was writing for stage and broadcast media.
Okay. So writing was always an ambition, kind of really. And but then you went to, kind of youth theatre role. That's kind of something of what I'm doing. So how was that the first port? How did that start? Was it just, because obviously I imagine getting commissions is pretty tricky.
Yeah, it was, I started doing things with young people when I was 16. So when I was then looking for what I wanted to do in theatre, it made sense to sort of go into arts education and youth theatres. And then I think I knew that the Hampstead Theatre, sadly they got rid of their whole youth department. But at the time it was really thriving, and I knew that they often offered commissions for the youth theatre. And they would sometimes take a risk on a writer to write a play for the youth theatre. They wouldn't necessarily for the main stage. So when I went in for what we call like the intro meetings, which is like, oh, we like your writing, keep in touch. I made a point of being like, I want the Heat and Light Commission. And when it comes around to writing that, I really want it. Whereas I feel like lots of writers don't go in saying, oh, I really want to write for the youth theatre. And I was like, I want to be considered for that commission. And then I was, and I got it.
So, I mean, the education departments at theatre, I mean, those two, Hackney Empire and Hampstead, I mean, they also run other stuff. So as soon as you get into a theatre, then you're already, I mean, I've noted you've done work with prisons, you've also worked in, I mean, you're working at the university. I mean, you kind of, writing has been kind of the day job, as it were, but the evening job has always been something extra as well.
Yeah, well, I feel like, I don't know, I find it boring to write all day. I think I always listen to those Radio 4 programs and writers talk about jumping out of bed and they can't wait to get to their desk and write out their 2,000 words. And that's just never been me. And I think they're lying. I'm like, no one jumps out of bed to go sit at a desk and write. And I do love writing, but it's hard work. And I feel like for me to balance not just the boredom, but also what am I going to write about if I'm not engaging with people in the world? So even at the moment where I'm incredibly busy with writing, I'll still find time to at least do something which is not writing. So I'm using other parts of my brain and engaging with people and the world. Yeah. And as you mentioned, I've done work in prisons and I loved it. It really put me out of my comfort zone, like going into a prison to teach playwriting. The first few sessions, I was completely scared shitless. I was like, what am I doing in here? I don't know what I'm doing. And I remember the first day and they were like, oh, if anything goes wrong, there's a buzzer you press, like for emergencies. I said, right, well, where? I don't see the buzzer. They said, oh, this room actually doesn't have a buzzer, so you just need to get down the hallway. And I was like, oh, okay, good. But actually, it was amazing, and the women on that course were amazing. But it inspired me loads in other things I've written.
Yeah, but it feels like that process has always been a kind of intricate part of how you write as well. So that even though they're day and evening jobs, they're still part of the same job. What is that same job?
It's a tricky one to unpack for me because I think what it's not, and I think sometimes people think it is, or maybe some writers work this way, is saying, oh, here's what I've done, can tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong. I'm not really interested in people telling me how to write a play because I feel like that's the fun bit. Yeah. So I want to do that bit. But it's about, I think, placing myself in a world or a community or with people who are going to make me a better writer, but who hopefully I'm also getting them to think about their lives in creative ways. And I sometimes find it's something in that exchange where the writing kind of comes from. Yeah. So it's hard to sort of give an overarching idea of it. But, as an example, whenever I've often workshopped a play at early stages, I've often gone to some sort of, I'll use the broad term, community that the play is in somewhat dealing with, to sort of just test it out and just sort of see how it's resonating, see what people think, because it's sort of trying to find some sort of truth in the heart of the play in that. And then also, again, be inspired by what's interesting to write about. What do these people want to see on stage?
So that's really interesting because you're talking about truth and truth in art, obviously, but the TIE tradition in this country, which was gloriously propagandist in the 80s, which was set out to go and be an arm of education. It seems that certainly theatre for young people has come from that tradition in this country, where we go and we talk about drugs. Max and I, for example, were at a play last week where we were seeing about drugs education, and it was a firm moralistic play about how you shouldn't take drugs. Now, you would never write a play like that, or would you? I mean, how is it that you use drama to get at the truth, but not arbitrate between lines of right and wrong?
Well, I think it's just thinking about, the truth for me is, so when you see a play as a kid and you say, don't do drugs, are really terrible. You think, well, if we want to honestly talk about it, well, people do drugs because they're fun, and people are, feel good on them. So actually, to me, that approach isn't going to work. But also, I think it's about, no one cares what I think. If I came in here and put on a play and said, don't do drugs, well, who am I? You've never met me. And 1 hour, 2 hours in a room with me isn't going to change your decision. You know, that's the reality. And I think theatre can do amazing things, but I don't think it can go in and say, oh, I've seen this play, and now I've changed my mind. I'm never going to do that again. I've seen the play, I'm never going to bully someone again, because Evan Placey did a play. That's not going to happen. But I think also what makes us start to plant the seed to change minds is not when we're being told what to do, but when we emotionally engage in a story, right? We're moved by someone's story or their plight and their story. It makes us think. And I think for me, that's what I'm after. I'm after stories. I don't think it's my job to tell people how to live their lives. I think that's their job. That's their parents' job. That's someone else's job, maybe even a teacher's job. It's not my job. So I suppose the kinds of stories I tell are informed by how I hope people live their lives or what I hope I'm getting people to think about. But ultimately, it's about just telling stories. That's kind of what I think my job is.
You write, you have a brilliant introduction. This is a very good book, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Do go out and buy it. It's only $11.99. Where you say you don't write for gatekeepers. And of course, I'm a gatekeeper in the sense that I work in an education department. In some way, I'm part of the process that decides what goes on the stage. Also, I'm a gatekeeper because I'm a parent. I'm just really interested in the line, I don't write for gatekeepers. Who do you most write for?
I write for the audience. Right. So in the case of in the case of young people, if it's a play for young people, what I mean by that is I'm not writing for their parents or their teachers who say, oh, we want to see a play about drugs that has this lesson because that's what we want to use it for. If you go beyond the story and then have a discussion and you want to create a lesson around it, that's great. Do what you want to do, but that's not for me. I don't go to the theatre for people to give me a lesson that someone else decided I should have. And I think we really want to write theatre for young audiences. We want to bring young people into theatres. Yeah. We've got to tell stories they're excited about and interested in, which isn't going to be the same thing their parents are interested in and want to see.
So that gets really interesting because, obviously, you're talking about young audiences here, and in my head I'm thinking young being young people, that's 13 plus. But also there's a even younger still, there's children, and whenever you put on a play for young audiences, they tend to be made up of families. And I'm kind of really interested because you've got your gatekeepers sitting right next to the other members of the audience, which are the children or young people. So in that situation, it feels like you've got to also write for a gatekeeper who's a parent. I'm just wondering, does that complicate it?
It can complicate in terms of as finding a form for your story that's going to be entertaining for everyone, but not in the way of, when we talk about gatekeepers, which is that parents can be there, like, I don't want my child to see this. I'm not writing for them in that way. One of the most thrilling things for me was seeing a production of Girls Like That, one of my plays, and seeing parents and children together. And listening to people afterwards where mums are saying, do your friends talk like that? Is this happening? Are you thinking about this? And having those uncomfortable conversations which they can have off the back of the play, because it makes it easier than sitting down your daughter and saying, have you watched porn? Are people sending photos in your school? Whereas actually you can just talk about the story you just saw, and those things come out. So in a way, I am writing for both because,
so that feels,
what's interesting to the child is hopefully interesting to the parent.
So that feels like an even more moral purpose, because what you're doing is you're facilitating a genuine change in a kind of dynamic of a conversation by not making it personal.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's not my purpose in writing it. No. I would say that's a wonderful thing that comes out of, I think, writing a story which is just for the story's sake, is those things can come out. Because again, then the learning, the education can happen after, based on what discussion the parent or the teacher, whoever, wants to have with that child or not, rather than me having had that discussion, if that makes sense.
Brilliant. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, does anybody have any questions they want to put to Evan after just having seen some of that? So, no, don't do it. I've got plenty. There seems to be and it was clear in that scene there's a clear don't know if it's clear, but it's a kind of, you want to show people transgressing, people stepping over. That's where the drama is, right? And seeing that scene at the beginning, that you want to know more, because you've got the whole situation there. You've got a younger person, and to clarify, Freddie is 21 and Diane is what, 27?
22, 29.
There we go. Close. And so clearly something's happened. What is it about the nature of transgression that makes it so dramatic? And why do unfailingly we want to go for it?
I suppose I've never really thought about it. I guess it taps into something that I think is unspoken in all of us, right? Often when I'm teaching, I talk about, that I feel like the best plays are the ones that say the things we're all thinking but can't say out loud, or ask the things that no one else is. And there's something about transgressions, which are things that we all identify. We've all thought that, or been there, and wondered, well, what if I did that? What if I'd stepped over that line? And I think that makes it really exciting, because that's truthful. We've all been there where, okay, we know how we're supposed to behave, but there's always moments where we feel like either we have transgressed or we've wanted to. And I feel like drama does a really good job at tapping into those desires.
Yeah. And these lines are kind of everywhere, aren't they? I mean, it's really horrible to do this, but in a way, to go through all your plays and think, what are the lines of transgression? Is this where I'm finding? It's like divining where the drama is. So.
Yeah, I feel like it's for me, it's slightly more organic than that, even though it adds up to the same thing, which is, especially in the work we've been talking about for young audiences, what's interesting about being a young person, especially at a teenage age, really any age, is the lines are really blurred of, are you a child, are you an adult? And so that in itself is a kind of transgression. At what point are you mature enough to handle what, or able to do what, and make what decision? And so, so I feel like it always comes in somehow to the story. And because I often think about, well, what plays for young people am I not seeing? Or what stories? That in itself feels somewhat like a transgression, because you're telling a story which maybe people feel like, oh no, we shouldn't be telling that story for young people, or at least haven't happened before.
And I'm glad you sort of mentioned it, because a lot of your work isn't just for young people. It's just that happens to be about young people, and young people is the terrain. It just feels as though there shouldn't be a category here, in a way. Is that part of the point?
It's really tricky, and I don't know where I sit on this, because I think, for me as a writer, when I sit down to write a play, beyond it often having a young person as a protagonist, which is what, somewhat makes it I guess, when I'm starting to write a play for young people, I then forget about it. And like, now my job is to write a play and be truthful to that character. But I think absolutely I would fight to death that we do need theatre for young audiences, because if we said, well, all theatre is for everyone, then actually what would happen is we'd quickly cut any work for young people. And we'd close out that audience. It's already happening in a lot of theatres. Because, sometimes it can be trickier to sell, and all the other reasons. It's trickier to market, because we're marketing to the gatekeepers, the parents, whatever, rather than, most kids don't walk up to a box office and buy a theatre ticket, like in the way they might do for cinema, maybe less so now. And I think absolutely we need it, because we need to say, this is for you. The theatre is for you. You can have stories for you. And I feel like actually we need to reserve that space to make sure we're also still trying to bring in new audiences.
One of your publications is a book of poetry, and that might surprise some people to know. And you obviously use your skills as a poet in your playwriting. So how do you find that the poetry has informed the playwriting and the playwriting?
It's part of a collection of a bunch of poets. How does it inform? I don't know, I'm always really interested in language and rhythm, and I'm really interested in heightened language. So watching a play, hopefully we believe in what the characters are saying, but for me it's never about naturalism. And it always slightly jars with me when people say, oh, it feels really natural, it feels like how we speak. And I feel like, well, hopefully that's because you believe in the character, but I'm always interested in something slightly bigger. Like, I feel like my characters have a way with words that I certainly don't, because I have time to think about that witty comeback that someone makes that I feel like a lot of people couldn't come up with on the spot. And there's something really interesting in terms of rhythms and a kind of colourfulness to language, because to me theatre is about words in so many ways, and so that really excites me. And so in some ways that's where the poetry comes in, sometimes in a very literal way, so I've written stuff in rhyme and in verse before, but also just in terms of the rhythm of how we understand a character is by the rhythm or of their speech or the words they use.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly true, and I'm going to look over at our youth theatre about this, because we've done, obviously, Girls Like That and Consensual, and part of the attraction, I mean, I can only speak for Consensual because it was before my time, Girls Like That, but was the great big school classroom scenes where there's kind of so much kind of back and forth, and you can tell that you've spent hours just kind of crafting so that one line hits the other. I mean, just the young people in the audience, what's it like having been inside those scenes? I mean, it's fun to play, eh? Yeah?
It makes you feel cool, because it's like you'd never be able to, like you said, never be able to have a comeback like good in class. So like when you can do it actively, you're like, I feel kind of cool with it.
Yeah, like you're all stand-up comics.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I would never be this funny in real life, so it's great.
Very good, excellent. So there wasn't really a question there, but I mean, I think that kind of gets to the point in that this stuff is really crafted, and I mean, looking at the stuff, yeah, the puns are incredibly. They're all there, aren't they? What's the question? Ladies and gentlemen, can somebody help me with a question?
I've got one.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Something that we found in putting both Girls Like That and Consensual up on stage, the person I found and would like hammer it home to the youth theatre was your use of punctuation to tell particular kind of emotional feelings, and I just wondered if you could kind of elaborate on the way that you deliberately kind of put in full stops in the middle of sentences, and the way that kind of informs a character's decisions, intentions, and the way that moves the scenes forward.
Yeah, punctuation is hugely important to me. And always when I'm in a rehearsal room, I always think, because we have a habit, not just actors, anyone, where we self-correct. So suddenly someone corrects the punctuation. I think, don't correct the punctuation. This person isn't speaking correctly. I think it's that often, I mean, it's because I talk really fast, I talk a lot, that I think I'm really often interested in characters who, even in their inarticulacy, are articulate, if that makes sense. And that sometimes their words get ahead of them. So for me, there's something about the way punctuation works, that characters, their words are coming out and not catching up with their thoughts, or their thoughts are ahead, and therefore suddenly a sentence stops because the new thought comes in. I feel like I have a lot of characters who, they interrupt themselves, so in the way you'd see a dash, where the next character would interrupt, I'm quite interested when people interrupt themselves, because as they're in the middle of a thought, the new one has come in, and actually they just carry on in that new trajectory. And also I feel like punctuation does a good job at bringing in the subtext of what someone's not saying. So when someone suddenly realizes where something's about to go, and so they stop short, or change, or overcompensate in whatever way it is. And also for me, pace is really important, which is also how you can sort of, I guess, slightly manipulatively glide over either bits of exposition or bits which I feel like, oh, this is quite raw and emotional bit, whereas actually if it's going at a million miles an hour, we as an audience are trying to keep up. And I feel like you can get away with that more, and it's more exciting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote in one of my notes around a question, truth in nonsense, and I think this speech by Riley kind of demonstrates it. I'm going to be hopeless in getting the right accent for this, but I mean, just this is what's written. Like this, yeah, you got these two, and he's all boom, 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 yeah, and I wanna razzmatazz the Zaza, and she's all maybe baby say Cece, and so he's all but love the dove, and I wanna spread the red of the love, gov, and she's all dispose of the clothes and din the skin and hyper pipe, And so he puts the plastic and the playstick, and then there's all score more to the whore of the amor, ya, like that, shack, tack, pow, and then rewind or behind or the crawlies or wawa laters. So, yeah. Now, I read that and I went, what? But I also went, I know exactly what you mean. What are you getting at there? What's in there?
So the context of that, by the way, it's from Banana Boys, which was that play I mentioned for the Hampstead Theatre, the first play for audiences I wrote. And it's in a like a condom lesson at school.
Yeah.
And Riley sort of throughout talks very like that. I was slightly interested in like slang, which was so ridiculous. Yeah. And that actually we start to follow along and everyone gets what he's talking about, but that sometimes the nonsense of slang. And that's what I mean, that's an exaggerated version of the heightenedness of what I'm after, which is, okay, we get that it's slang, but I'm not trying to literally do slang someone in that year when I was writing it would speak like. And there's something, I think, I don't know, funny to me that, you know, as an outsider, we're laughing both with him and at him because of how ridiculous he sounds, but actually he's trying to be cool and make the sort of student teacher intimidated by his knowledge of this sex ed and how it all works.
And we've all kind of seen spoken word poets as well, and some of them who are maybe less good than the other ones, who are kind of, there's a rhythm there and they're just saying pretty much the first thing that comes into their head. And it feels like along that sort of almost subconscious splurge sort of feeling. At this point, let's bring it back up to class and let's, ladies and gentlemen, see a little bit more Evan Placey with a small extract from Girls Like That. Kind of even in that, you kind of see kind of the layers of stuff. You've got, casually thrown aside, talking about suffragettes and stuff, how ironic, you know, and then a kind of them pecking in. Girls Like That is has become a brilliant piece for young people around the country and won awards, I know, for you. When you set out to do it, a feminist piece for young women, how did that emerge, given that you were working with young people? Where was the story for you?
Well, it emerged because I had a really open commission from 3 theatres, which is, not that's unusual, but it was very much like, write whatever you want. Just, we want you to go do some workshops in all 3 cities, which is something I would have done anyways. It emerged because I went in with a whole bunch of ideas to sort of see what resonated with the young people. And the one idea that everyone was like, nope, we don't need to see anything, was around feminism. Because everyone said, we don't need feminism. Everything is equal. And so I was like, and that's why I'm going to write a play. Because you think you don't want to play, and that's why that's what I'm going to write. And then, so that's where it sort of first began, because I was sort of interested in why all these young people, and particularly the young women in the room, felt like there was no need for feminism and everything was equal, which I found really fascinating. And then, so coming back to gatekeepers, as I honestly say in this room full of people, I wrote a sort of one-page thing on what I was going to write, which is a very different play, but similar themes. And one of the gatekeepers at the theatres got very nervous about what I was going to do in terms of, looking at young women's sexuality, and sort of tried to sort of tame it down, and sort of gave me back my one page with like edits, and why don't you do this? So I wrote half of that play, and I just thought, I don't like this. What is this? And I realized it was because it had the body of the idea I'd originally wanted to do, but it had lost the heart, it had lost the grit, it had lost everything that was exciting to me about the play. So I threw it out, and 8 days before the first draft deadline, I emailed the theatres and said, I need a bit more time. There's been some changes. I didn't say, I've thrown out the play. I have nothing. And they said, okay, that's fine, but actually we can't give you an extension because all 3 theatres have booked trains to go meet each other to have the first script meeting. But it's fine, we know it's a first draft. And so I just had this new idea, and it's never really happened before, but it fell into place. I knew what it was, and it was Girls Like That. I knew the form, I knew everything, and I feel like there's a manic energy to the play, which is still there, which comes across from just me writing manically, and I sort of just knew like this is what the play needed to be, and it also needed that kind of rawness, which I think helped by the fact that I didn't have much time to get through the story.
Brilliant. I mean, that thing about gatekeepers again, because I've got to go back to that, because I'm one of those people who probably write notes over your things and send back to you. But it's interesting that, isn't it? Because what's the question? The question is really around all of us have got ideas of who the audience are, and it's only the playwright who really knows. And I know that we had a tremendous anxiety in the department. I mean, when we were approaching Consensual, here we are doing a play with the Youth Theatre. It does, in fact, mention the word felching, and ladies and gentlemen, it describes what felching is. And of course, this is tough stuff, and there are. See, I'm enjoying this transgression thing, and so none of us know where the lines are really. Is kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always about like there's other debates, which is like when is it explicit, and when is it actually like it's necessary for the drama, I always, for me, it's always like I absolutely believe that these characters, and they're not just complete figments of my imagination, they're rooted in some sort of reality, would say these things, and so even looking at girls like that, it's not that I ignore the gatekeepers, like when I'm working with a theatre who are paying me, it's all about compromise and understanding. But I felt like, actually, when you see it as a pitch document, I can see why you get a bit nervous. But actually, I thought, if they read it in the script, they'll get it. And so I just took that risk, and I thought, maybe they'll read it and say, we hate this doesn't work, we're still having the same issues. But I thought, if they read it, they'll get it. I'm not just going to be like, oh, look, audience, let's make you all uncomfortable. It was about, no, like, you get, oh, this is a story and it's trying to do something. And actually, like, I stand by everything. I'm like, well, young people, they talk about these things. Naked photos are going around schools. People are picking apart naked bodies, and why shouldn't we see characters do that on stage? If we want to better our society, we have to be willing to address these things and tell these stories. People do have affairs with their teachers. And we need to get behind those stories, which is what Consensual was interested in doing. And looking at just because someone's underage doesn't mean they don't have sexual desires and want to sleep with people above age. So how do you look at that story, as difficult as it is?
Yeah, brilliant. And in your introduction to the guide, you ask yourself, what are the questions that no one is asking now? Have you got a sense of questions that are kind of in your, I don't want to give away future plot scenarios, but are there questions that you think there are still no-go areas for us to be exploring, particularly with theatre for young audiences?
Yeah, I think there always are. Certainly, with the work I've done in prison, I look at the stories of the childhoods a lot of these women had, which are these amazing things that people have overcome, and I just think, is prison really where they should be? And if we're honest with ourselves, we're all to blame for the society that created situations where these women had to do things they had to do to lead them to prison. As a token example, it doesn't really give away a plot. In one of the pieces I'm writing, which is for younger kids, which I haven't done that much for, that's definitely under teen, it's like an 8+ show. It's not what it's about, but there are gay parents in it. And as a gay parent myself, I felt like, where are these stories? We pretend, oh, everything's fine, we're all cool with it. But like, I've never walked into a children's play and been like, oh, there are the gays on stage. Because like, no, we're okay with it. We just don't want to see it, and we certainly don't want our kids to see it, and we don't want to go to the theater. We want to see, I don't know, something happening. And I sort of think like, actually, like, but that's the reality for kids. So actually, why are we not seeing? I think that's just one example. There's loads of things. If there's anything that makes it seem unhappy to us, or makes us confront our society, especially in kids' theatre, even more so than stuff with teens, I think we don't put it on stage. And not just stage. Even worse is in TV and film. We don't put it in that stuff either for young people. So I don't know. It's important to me again about telling those stories, like so that those kids can be like, oh, I see myself reflected on screen or on stage. and see bits of my life there.
I think I'm now going to ask you, if you might, to read out the scene 14 of Pronoun,
Okay, sure.
which is Dean's speech to Assembly. Would you mind?
I wouldn't mind. It's been a long time since I've looked at this, so please bear with me.
Okay, because I
And
think
remember, it's been a long time since my Liza Minnelli days as well. So the context of this is Dean, who is transgender. He's been asked by the school, who are super PC and happy, to do a sort of speech on, I can't remember what the speech is supposed to be on tolerance, for when Ofsted come to do the inspection. So Ofsted are all there, it's a school assembly, and he's been asked to do this tolerance speech. Good afternoon, students, teachers, and visitors from Ofsted. Our school prides itself on tolerance. You can be who you want to be, and we will tolerate you. It says so in a policy document in a drawer somewhere. We learn in history about a black woman who decided one day to sit where she wanted to on a bus. We learn about another woman who chained herself to Parliament. We learn about some angry drag queens in a bar who fought back one night. We learn that to be tolerant of every person is what we should aspire to, a badge of honor we can wear. I am a tolerant person. Fuck tolerance. Those people, the black lady on the bus, the woman in chains, those men in heels, they weren't fighting for tolerance, to be tolerated, because tolerance is horseshit. Tolerance is the emptiest word in the dictionary. Tolerate is what you do when someone's playing their music loudly on the bus. Tolerate is what you do when someone's texting next to you in the cinema. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be admired. I want to be envied. I want to be loved. Love me. And if that's too much to ask, then hate me. But don't tolerate me. Because tolerance means sweet fuck all.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of me asking the questions, and it's kind of, could we bring the house lights down a bit on the stage so we can see who we've got in the audience? And if anybody wants to ask some questions, we'll hang around for a little while whilst you think. We'd love to hear your questions. Any questions? Some questions? Brilliant. Thank you, sir.
Obviously, a lot of your plays deal with socio-political elements at the time, but from the perspective of young people, how do you sort of track yourself into the mindset of understanding exactly what they're doing, not being obviously not being a young person yourself?
How dare you? That's young.
I suppose it's just spending time with young people, and it's those workshop things I was talking about. And I suppose even more than that, it's using my imagination. You know, I was young once, and remembering what it felt like. And I suppose it's like any character, really, even other, adult characters who are different than me. It's sort of imagining what does it feel like to be in those shoes. And, here's this character I built in that situation. What do they feel like? What are they doing? And like I said, asking young people, spending time with young people, and, testing scripts out. You can quickly see when, like, a joke falls flat on a group of young people, or on any audience. But especially, I think young audiences are far more honest than adult audiences. Because adult audiences, for the most part, these are generalizations, will sit there politely, even when they're bored out of their mind. Whereas I've seen, shows tour to schools, and, if people pull out their phones, you're in trouble. And so my job is, to work harder, because you want them, a lot of them haven't chosen to be there. Their teacher or their parent has brought them there. So you feel like, you've got to work extra hard to be like, you don't want to be here, but I'm going to make you thankful that you're here. And I've got to get your attention that much more, because you're not going to give me the time of day otherwise. And even younger kids will tell you even more, because they'll just get up and start walking around, they'll start rolling on the floor, they'll start talking to someone across the room. So testing scripts out in development and in previews is how you sort of see what's working. Yeah, that kind of answer?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Other questions? Thank you.
So I was thinking about in Consensual, the fact that Diane's a woman as being kind of particularly important. Have you ever thought about that? Because if she was a man, I think the audience would have an entirely different response to her as a character. Do you think that's important to you?
Yeah, definitely. it's important on lots of levels. I was interested in, even as in looking at the general story. Okay, student has affair with teacher in a kind of headline way, let's say. I felt like I'd seen and heard a lot more about male teachers with female students, and I hadn't heard as much the stories of female teachers and male students, so that was really interesting. Lots of my plays have female protagonists, and I was really, again, I felt like I want to give a really juicy, fun role for a woman to play and have her lead the story. And if I'm honest, writing a play like this, when I set out, I don't normally get that worried about any flack I'm going to get in terms of things we're talking about, gatekeepers, whatever. But I was a bit nervous because, it's a play exploring the gray area of consent. It can be very heated. And I thought, if I write a play where the main character is a man who has potentially slept with this young girl, I thought, I'm just, right away, the block there, no one's going to even open their ears. They're just going to be like, what, and you want us to somehow think that there's even any room in this? And I thought, even though hopefully by the end you start to see the gray areas in a situation, I thought at least if it's a woman, I'll have there's a bit more space to start looking at things. And again, it made the story interesting to me of looking at the power dynamics. So yeah, does that kind of answer it? But at the end of the day, I'm not writing about every woman. It was, this character, I started to see her, and she was just a woman, and that's whose story I wanted to tell.
And a last question? Yes, thank you, at the back there.
So obviously you've done workshops and just saying like with that character it just came to you, but a lot of things like I found girls like that quite like something that definitely happened in my school. Like if you're writing a period drama for TV, you have to do a lot of research. Do you do a really deep level of research into like these kind of situations and true stories and things like that?
It depends on the play. Girls like that, except for the sort of the stuff I talked about in terms of going to work with some young people directly as I was exploring what I was going to write about, and I sort of did stuff once I decided what it was vaguely going to be about. I sort of did sessions just specifically about feminism, like what do you know about feminism? What do you know about the history of feminism? In terms of like the school dynamics, so that's what you mean, like I didn't do any research. I just felt like having worked with young people, I saw it. And there's something I think, also when you're not like the primary teacher in a school, when you go in to maybe do a workshop, that kids sort of don't notice you in the same way, so they're more themselves. And also I think there's this kind of like, oh, he's an adult. He doesn't know that we're really bullying this person through like, small means. And you just sort of watch, and I felt like, oh, I'd seen all this stuff happen. So I just felt like I knew it. And that stuff happened when I was a teen. There maybe wasn't, we didn't have cell phones in the corridor, but everything else was there. So that was a play actually I didn't research tremendously. I researched, the history of feminism, and I sort of looked at that for the monologues in the play. But in terms of the dynamics of the young women at school, I felt like I sort of knew a lot of it.
And where can we next see an Evan Placey production? Is there one on?
In this country, the next one that will be on hasn't been announced yet, so I can't say what it is, but I'm writing another play for the National Youth Theatre's West End season. I assume it'll be announced soon. Maybe don't.
You'll do that in 2 years' time.
But if all goes to plan, that will be on. It will open in September.
Fantastic. Well, yes.
Another question just in the
Oh, sorry. I'm slightly light blind here, so. Please.
We touched on your use of slang earlier, and I was just wondering what you do in terms of research, because there's obviously a fine line between real authenticity and being contrived. How do you balance that?
It's things that I've observed, but again, I think I'm unafraid to make stuff up. Because again, with that heightened nature, slang changes so quickly. So I feel like I sometimes invent slang for characters. And also it's about being like, okay, who am I rooting these characters as? They don't have to speak to sort of whatever the most common bit of slang is. It's like, well, here are these characters and this is how they speak. So often, not often, but in some of the plays, there are characters who speak with sort of certain Americanisms or slang. And people always say, oh, is that sort of bits of you slipping through? Probably. But it's also that I feel like in this country, we watch a lot of American television, and so people appropriate certain words and stuff, and I'm sort of interested in that. So I think it's about whatever rules you set up for your play in terms of authenticity of that character, that sort of then dictate the rules of how they speak, if that makes sense. Rather than it being like, oh, it needs to be very specific and needs to be, relatable to a certain time and place. And I think you sort of invent that somewhat. Does that kind of answer it? Yeah. But again, it's that research of like going to spend time with young people, so that it vaguely resembles something without needing to be like, oh, that's literally the word that is used for today. I then sort of play with stuff.
Fantastic. Just checking I'm not missing anybody. Okay, yes, fantastic.
Quite a lot of plays are about sex or sexual issues. Why do you think it's such a go-to playwright to talk about?
I don't know that so many plays are about that. But there are certainly lots. Why is it a go-to issue? I suppose because it goes back to that thing of things we don't talk about in other realms of our life, right? Are interesting areas for drama, and I think we attach a lot of sort of moral lines, and again, those sort of lines slipping over to sex, so it becomes really ripe for aspects of drama. I think is probably why, and people have really strong opinions on it. It affects people's lives in many, many ways, both good and bad. So I feel like, again, it feels something that is really right to drama, I guess. Yeah, and it's a big part of people's lives, so I guess that's why.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Evan Placey, ladies and gentlemen.